Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are opening a file that frankly it feels like it was written by a screenwriter who couldn't quite decide on a genre.
Chuckles.
That's a good way to put it.
We've got a protagonist who sits right at the intersection of, serious high-stakes legislative power and, well, massive 90s pop culture nostalgia.
It is a unique profile. We're continuing our Know Your MEP series, looking at the European Parliament representatives from Ireland, and today the spotlight is on Cynthia ní mhurchú.
And the phrase that kept jumping out at me from the research notes is glitz and grit. Which, usually I'd roll my eyes at that. It sounds a bit like a marketing tagline, but in this case, it actually seems to fit.
It really does, and I think the mission for this deep dive is to decode that specific dynamic. How do you go from being a legitimate pop culture icon, someone whose face was in millions of living rooms,
Millions.
to becoming a heavy-hitting legislative force dealing with AI regulation and international fishing quotas? That is the big question. Because usually when celebrities pivot to politics, there's a lot of skepticism.
A lot.
Is it a vanity project? Do they actually know how the machinery works? So we're going to see if those two worlds are as different as they seem, or if one is actually, training for the other.
And we're pulling this from a pretty detailed profile that tracks her entire career trajectory, her work with Fianna Fáil, the Renew Europe group, and her current priorities in Brussels.
It's quite a path. Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we get to the European Parliament, before the law courts, we have to talk about the glitz. We have to talk about 1994.
The legend factor.
Yes. If you were in Ireland, or honestly, pretty much anywhere in Europe in 1994, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Cynthia ní mhurchú co-hosted the Eurovision Song Contest in Dublin.
Alongside Jerry Ryan. A massive cultural touchstone.
It is. And look, I don't want to get too bogged down in the nostalgia, but we have to set the scene. This wasn't just any Eurovision.
No, it wasn't.
This was the year Riverdance debuted as the interval act.
The 7 minutes that changed Irish dancing forever.
Exactly. So the eyes of the world were just glued to this stage. And there she was. Now, usually we dismiss TV hosting as fluff, right? It's smiling and reading a teleprompter.
Right.
But looking at the notes here, you're arguing this wasn't just a hosting gig. This was a skill demonstration.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the environment. You are live. You have an audience of, what was it then? About 300 million people. Anything can go wrong.
Anything.
And you have to manage all of that in 3 languages.
Right. She did it in English, Irish, and French.
Seamlessly. And that right there, that's where we start to see the bridge to her current role. In the European Parliament, language is power. It's currency. We see so many politicians go to Brussels or Strasbourg, and they're brilliant policy minds, but they just hit a wall because they're relying 100% on translators.
They can't have that sidebar conversation, the one in the corridor.
Exactly. The real deals in Brussels often happen in those corridors or over coffee in what they call the lingua franca, which is very often a mix of English and French.
And ní mhurchú just walked in the door already fluent?
She did. She isn't the rookie looking confused in the headset. She's already in the conversation.
That's a really good point. It's a form of soft power. You're immediately more accessible to colleagues from France, Belgium, Luxembourg.
It allows you to build alliances, and that's the job. The job isn't just voting. It's convincing other people to vote with you. So that glitz of 1994 was actually a high-pressure test of communication skills that she's using right now.
Okay, I buy that. But being charming in French doesn't help you write a law about data privacy?
No, it doesn't.
And this is where the timeline gets surprising, because she didn't just ride that wave of fame straight into a political seat. She kind of vanished from the public eye.
She did. This is the pivot. And it's crucial to understanding her. She didn't stay in entertainment. She went to the courtroom.
And not just for a little while. We're talking about
nearly 3 decades as a senior family law barrister.
30 years.
Yes. The sources actually highlight she's a triple threat. She started as a primary school teacher, then into media, then law. But that law career is the bulk of her professional life.
And we need to be specific here. She wasn't doing, corporate mergers.
Yeah.
She wasn't sitting in a boardroom looking at spreadsheets. She was in family law.
Which is the trenches.
Why does that distinction matter so much? Law is law, right?
Not really. Corporate law can be very abstract. Family law, it's the front lines of human crisis. It's messy. It's emotional. You're dealing with domestic violence, custody battles, the breakdown of relationships, state intervention.
So it's high stress, but very, very personal.
It's the lived reality of the legal system. And the analysis suggests this gives her a real no-nonsense edge in Parliament. She's seen the cracks in the system. She knows that when you pass a law, it eventually lands on someone's doorstep. It affects a real family.
That's interesting because so often in politics, you get people who are purely theoretical. They have a degree in political science, they worked as an aide, then they got elected. They've never had to tell a client that they just lost custody of their kids.
Precisely. It grounds her.
Yeah.
And remember her political positioning here. She's Fianna Fáil, which sits within the Renew Europe group.
And just for anyone not following the European groupings, Renew Europe is essentially the centrist liberal bloc.
Yes. Pro-business, pro-EU, but generally very pragmatic.
Yeah.
And that barrister's brain fits well there. She's not an idealist shouting from the fringes. She's a centrist who is used to negotiating settlements.
Okay, so we have the glitz communication skills and the grit of 30 years in family law. Let's look at what she's actually doing with that combination. What is she working on? Because it seems like she's trying to carve out a niche as a kind of protector.
That's the thread. That's what connects her past to her present. She positions herself as a protector of citizens in the digital age, and her biggest target right now is AI and deepfakes.
This is everywhere right now. But what's her specific angle? Is she just saying AI is bad?
No, it's more nuanced than that. She's calling for strict labeling of any AI-generated content. She wants it to be immediately obvious to a user if what they're seeing is real or synthetic.
Which sounds sensible, but is it actually enforceable?
Well, that's the challenge. But her motivation, and this goes right back to the family law background, is about harassment. She's focused on how deepfakes are weaponized against women and public figures.
You mean things like non-consensual deepfake pornography or fake videos designed to humiliate someone?
Exactly. And just think about that from a barrister's perspective for a second.
Right.
Evidence is everything.
Right.
If we enter a world where video evidence can't be trusted, or where someone's reputation can be destroyed by a fake video that looks 100% real, the legal system struggles to function.
So for her, this isn't just a tech issue, it's a justice issue.
Correct. And she's also a vocal supporter of the EU child sexual abuse regulation. Again, just draw the line back to her career. She's likely seen the fallout of abuse in her practice.
She's not just reading a briefing paper on it.
She's lived the files. It gives her a different kind of authority in the room, you know? It's harder to argue with someone who can say, I've represented the victims.
It makes the abstract policy human. Now, there's another piece of legislation she's pushing that I have to admit, it makes me a little skeptical. The right to disconnect.
The end of the 247 workday.
On paper, this sounds amazing. Bosses can't email you after 6:00 p.m. But let's be real here. We live in a global economy. If I'm a startup founder in Cork and my biggest client is in New York, 6:00 p.m. my time is when their day starts.
Sure.
If I can't answer an email, I could go out of business. Is she really proposing a hard cutoff?
This is where the glitz of the headline meets the grit of the policy details. It's not necessarily a hard ban on the technology itself, but a legal protection against the consequences.
What does that mean exactly?
It means you cannot be penalized, fired, or passed over for promotion for refusing to engage with work outside of your contracted hours. She's pushing for an EU-wide directive on this.
But isn't that already the case in places like France? They have those right to disconnect laws.
They do. And she wants to standardize that across Europe. Her argument is based on mental health and the always-on culture. She argues that without a legal framework, the employer will always take more. The boundary just naturally creeps.
I get the mental health argument. Burnout is a real thing. But I still wonder about the implementation. I mean, in high-performance industries, isn't the expectation of availability just baked into the salary?
That is the pushback she faces from business groups. They argue it reduces competitiveness, especially against the U.S. and China. But mhurchú is using her legal background to argue that labor laws are there to protect the worker from market forces. She's saying, if we don't write this down, it simply doesn't exist.
It's the barrister's brain again. You can't rely on a boss just being nice. You need a statute.
Exactly. And frankly, for a politician, it's a very popular policy with voters, even if businesses hate it.
True. I will stop your boss from texting you on Sunday is a pretty good campaign slogan.
It plays well.
So we've got digital safety and labor rights. These are big EU-wide topics. But she represents Ireland South.
Which is a huge constituency.
It is. Cork, Kerry, Waterford, Wexford, Limerick. A mix of urban and very rural. And very coastal.
And that brings us to the fourth pillar of her work. The regional champion. And specifically, the blue economy.
Fishing.
Fishing.
I feel like you can't talk about Irish politicians in Europe without talking about fish. It seems to be the eternal conflict.
It is the third rail of Irish-EU relations, and this is where mhurchú has to walk a very tightrope. Remember, she's in Renew Europe, she's pro-EU,
Yeah.
but the common fisheries policy is often deeply unpopular in her constituency.
Because Irish fishermen feel like they got a raw deal on quotas.
Historically, yes. The feeling is that foreign fleets catch fish in Irish waters while Irish boats are tied up. mhurchú has positioned herself as a fierce advocate for those communities. The sources note she is willing to clash with EU quotas.
But how does that work practically? You can't just storm into the commission and demand more fish. The science is the science.
Well, you can challenge the distribution. You can challenge the data. And you can advocate for subsidies and support when the quotas are cut. This is where the grit comes in. She's used to fighting for a client. In this case, the client is the fishing industry of Castletown Bear or Kilmore Quay.
It's interesting because it must put her at odds with her own political family in Europe sometimes.
It does. But all politics is local. If you can't deliver for the people who voted for you, the high-minded AI regulation doesn't matter. She has to balance the Brussels bubble topics with the bread and butter issues.
Speaking of bread and butter, or maybe scones and tea, she also sits on the Skull Tea Committee, Culture and Education.
Which sounds a bit soft, doesn't it?
It does. It sounds like planning art exhibitions.
But she's smart about it. She views culture as an economic driver. She links it directly to tourism.
Which makes perfect sense for Ireland South.
Exactly. If you represent Kerry and Cork, tourism is the lifeblood. She uses the KILOC committee to push for funding for heritage sites, for festivals, for things that bring people into beds in her region. It's not just art for art's sake, it's regional development.
So she's essentially monetizing the heritage.
In a way, yes. She's ensuring that European money flows into those sectors. It's a strategic use of a committee assignment that others might overlook.
So let's try to pull this all together. We started with the Eurovision host in the sparkly dress in 1994.
Chuckles.
We went through the primary school teacher, the journalist, the family law barrister fighting in the district courts for 30 years, and now the MEP dealing with deepfakes and fishing quotas.
It is a resume that shouldn't work, but somehow it does.
And when you look at this new wave of Irish MEPs, we've talked about others like Nina Carberry or Ciarán Maluli, there seems to be a trend here. It's not the career politician who climbed the ladder from the local council to the Dáil to Europe.
No, it's the triple threat model. It's people who have lived different lives before politics.
So what does Cynthia Ní Mhurchú specifically represent in that shift?
I think she represents the weaponization of communication. She combines that glitz, the ability to command a room, the multilingualism, the comfort on camera, with the grit of real legal technicality.
She can charm you in French, but she can also dissect a directive on data privacy.
Exactly. And in the modern political landscape, you cannot just be a wonk. You can't just be the smart person in the corner reading the file. You have to be able to sell the policy. You have to go on TikTok or Instagram or the news and explain why the right to disconnect matters to a voter in Waterford.
And also how to write the law so it actually holds up in court.
That's the verdict. Her power comes from that combination. The legal authority meets the TV icon.
It really makes you think about what we value in our representatives now. We used to look for people with just law degrees or just economic backgrounds, but now...
The world is noisier. Information is moving faster. The threats like AI are more abstract. You need someone who can cut through all that noise.
Which brings us to the final thought I want to leave everyone with today. We've looked at Cynthia Ní Mhurchú's path from the Eurovision stage to the Parliament floor. And it raises a question for me.
What's that?
We often talk about celebrity politicians as a negative thing, you know, a dumbing down of democracy. But in an era of deep fakes, 24-hour news cycles, and total information overload, is a background in media actually the most important qualification you can have?
That is the million-dollar question. Can you effectively govern if you don't know how to command the screen?
Or is the glitz actually the most important grit of all? Something to mull over the next time you're checking your emails after 6:00 p.m. Hopefully not for much longer if Ní Mhurchú has her way. Thanks for diving in with us.
See you next time.